Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's conversation where we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, and very specifically, we'll be talking about self-awareness. Now, this is a topic that I find fascinating, and I'm going to be sharing with you my ideas on emotional intelligence. Now, these ideas are very practical, and if you just take what I'm going to share with you today, I believe that you can bring about an immediate improvement in your sales, in your marketing, and especially any ventures to do with building your business, such as leadership competencies. So, thank you for joining me today. If you're joining me live, say g'day. Type in live in the chat box. If you're joining me on the replay, make sure you type replay into the chat box below. Well, self-awareness is the first pillar of emotional intelligence, and there's 5 pillars of emotional intelligence, and we're going to go through those today. We're going to talk about the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about the benefits on improving your levels of emotional intelligence, and we're also going to talk about what happens to your income as you rapidly improve your emotional intelligence. On top of that, we're going to learn about what happens when your emotional intelligence is less active in the area of self-awareness, and we're also going to have a look at what happens when you're more active in the area of self-awareness. And these are some great ideas, and I know that when you apply them, you're going to become a big success. Well, Catherine, thank you for joining me today from the UK. I hope you're having a wonderful day out there, and I know that these ideas that I'm going to share with you this morning are going to be wonderful. So here's an interesting statistic. It said that 9 out of 10 adults, they believe that they can predict their emotional state at any given time. So that's what society tells us. But what the research shows us is that only about 1 in 10 adults are able to actually articulate the emotional experience they're having at any given time. So what does that mean? What it means is that in society, a lot of people have inaccurate self-perceptions. So when you're starting a business, when you're starting a new career, what happens is you go through a learning phase. And in that learning phase, you have to become very confident in what you're doing. So at the start, you have low competence in the field, and you can have high confidence whilst having low competence, but there seems to be a bit of a gap. And what we want to work to as we become masters of our craft is we want to have a high level of competence coupled by a high level of confidence. And what this creates is it creates and leads to high performance. So I'm going to show you how to get to that today. So if you're joining me here live this morning in the UK, this evening here in Southeast Asia, type live in the chat box below. Let me know where you're joining us from. Or if you're joining us on the replay, please type in replay into the chat box. Now, one of the most fascinating statistics that you'll find today comes from a doctor by the name of Dr. Travis Bradbury. And through his research, not just in America, not just in Europe, not just in Asia, but throughout the entire world, what he discovered through his research is that people who have higher levels of emotional intelligence make more money. So what he discovered is there's a direct connection, a one-to-one connection between the level of emotional intelligence and the amount that you earn. And the worldwide statistic today is that people who have a higher level of emotional intelligence earn on average $29,000 per year more than people with a low emotional intelligence. So that in and of itself, for me, excites me, because I know that if I can increase my levels of emotional intelligence, I'm going to be rewarded with more money. And once I got more money, I can then pursue my dreams easier, because all of your goals, all of my goals, all of your dreams, they're going to require you to have a lot of money. So think about this. With what you can learn today and implement, you can immediately increase your income. And I believe that's quite exciting. So if you're joining me here this evening, make sure you type live into the chat box. If you're joining me on the live call tonight, type in live in the chat box so I know that you're joining me live. Or if you're watching this on the replay, type in replay so I know that you've joined me on the replay. So let's begin. There's 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. Now, the first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Self-awareness is understanding why you think and feel the way that you do. We're going to spend a lot of time on self-awareness this evening. The second pillar of emotional intelligence is self-regulation. You get into mental and emotional ruts throughout your life, throughout the year, throughout the week, throughout the day. And what you have to be able to do is get in and out of those emotional ruts really quickly. The third pillar of emotional intelligence is motivation. This is your ability to fail forward. It's your ability to fall down, get the learning, get back up, and go again. It's the ability to move outside of your comfort zone. It's the ability to move from comfort to discomfort and to be able to keep moving forward. The fourth pillar of emotional intelligence is social awareness. This is looking across at other people and understanding what they're thinking and what they're feeling without even having to ask them. We can also call this empathy. The fifth pillar of emotional intelligence is social regulation. This is your ability to convince and persuade people to come around to your way of thinking. And so these are the 5 core pillars of emotional intelligence. But under these 5 core pillars, there's about 25 different subsets of emotional intelligence. And we're going to take a deep dive into the first pillar of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. We're going to take a deep dive there tonight, and we're going to have a look at 3 key areas that once you start to improve in these 3 key areas, you're going to increase your performance and you're going to make a lot more money. So what got me into the field of emotional intelligence was I had started a business. I had learned to coach. I had learned to do different types of therapeutic applications. And then I had to build my business. And as part of building my business, I had to learn how to sell myself. And people would ask me, well, what are your strengths as a coach? And self-awareness, the first pillar of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, is understanding your strengths. It's understanding what you do best. And with understanding what you do best, you have to be able to articulate this to a potential prospect so they know what they're getting when they exchange their money with you. So with self-awareness, there's 3 key factors that we're going to have a look at now. The first key factor in self-awareness is what's called emotional awareness. And this is recognizing your emotions and the effects that they have on you. So in my disc style, I'm a very high I personality. And the emotion that comes along with the high I personality is optimism. And back in 2007, I was probably drunk, intoxicated with optimism. I believed that you could achieve anything. I could believe that everybody could do anything immediately. And I was drunk with optimism. And I was trying to figure out, how can I overcome that limitation? How do I take what is a good strength and make it stronger? But at that stage, that strength was actually a little bit intoxicating because the optimism was so high that for a lot of other people, they couldn't really vibe with it and get along with it. Now, if you've got a high I style on your disc, you've probably experienced the same thing. The second key factor here is having an accurate self-assessment. Now, in 2018, once I started to work on this key area of emotional intelligence, once I started to have a really deep look at the way I thought and the way that I felt and all my characteristics, I started to realize that my goals, the goals that I was setting, were just absolutely unrealistic. So when it comes to having an accurate self-assessment, you've got to be able to know your strengths and you have to be able to identify your limits. And I was setting goals that were way beyond my limit. And what happened was I eventually just self-sabotaged. I would start really, really strong, really enthusiastic, overly optimistic, believing I could achieve anything, believing I could jump from here to the moon in one leap. But what I soon realized was that all of these goals were absolutely possible, just not yet. So I started to have a look at what were my actual strengths and what were my limits. Once I understood my strengths and limits, then I could put better plans into place. So an accurate self-assessment is part of self-awareness. Now, the third part of self-awareness is self-confidence. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is you can never have too much confidence. People always struggle with having a low level of confidence, but people don't struggle with having a very high level of confidence. So, as part of self confidence, you have to have a strong sense of self worth, and you've got to understand your unique capabilities. And so, once I understood what my true strengths were, once I understood my levels of self worth and what truly made me happy, I started to get into my groove and I started to find my rhythm. And that was really important because that enabled me to quickly grow my business. So, when we break down self awareness, remember self awareness is understanding why you think and feel the way that you do. It's also about emotional awareness. It's recognizing the emotions that you experience and how they impact you as an individual. The second part is an accurate self assessment. And this is truly knowing your strengths and knowing your limits. And the third part is about self confidence. And that's getting to know really what makes you, what makes you really happy. And these things are absolutely essential as you're moving into high performance. So, this is the first part of emotional intelligence. And before we move on to the next part, I'm going to show you my 3 emotional quotient assessments that I've been tracking over the years, looking at my growth. I'd like to check in with you. What have you learned so far? What do you know about emotional intelligence? So, just in the chat box below, just that one down there on your digital device, say hello. Tell me where you're joining me from today, and tell me about what you know about emotional intelligence so far. And as you do that, I'm going to share with you my 3 emotional quotient assessments that I've been tracking over the past 3 years. So let's have a look here. What you can see on the screen now is an emotional quotient assessment. What an emotional quotient assessment does is it measures your emotional intelligence in 5 of the most important areas. It measures your self-awareness, it measures your self-regulation, it measures your motivation, it measures your empathy or your social awareness, and it also measures your social skills or your social regulation. And once it measures it, it compares your score against the population average. So if you're a high performer, if you want to become a high performer like I want to be, is I always want to track my score against other people in the population, because what happens is if you know your benchmarks, you can put very effective plans into place to improve those key areas. So let's have a look here. Starting at the top, this emotional quotient assessment I completed in 2017. Now, I'd been coaching for a while. I'd done a lot of personal development, and my self-awareness score came in at 78 points. Now, you measure self-awareness on a scale of 1 to 100. So my level of emotional intelligence here was 78 out of 100. However, it was nothing magnificent. It was nothing special, and it was only about 4 points higher than the average person in the Australian population. So back in 2017, the average person in Australia had an emotional quotient score in self-awareness of about 74 points. And mine was right there on the average. It was at 78. It was about 4 points higher than the other people. Now, for me, that was quite disappointing. I'm a high performer. I like to be the best. I like to have high scores. And so I started to ask myself, how can I improve this score? So I went deeper into emotional intelligence. I want to share some of these strategies with you this evening. And I started to look at how I can improve my levels of emotional intelligence. Tim from Malaysia, thank you for joining us. Bernice, great to see you there live. Catherine, thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello. I'm finding it hard to see you through the screen, so say good day. Let me know that you're there. So the emotional quotient assessment, what it does is it measures your level of emotional intelligence and it compares it to other people. And then what it does is it gives you very unique ideas and specific strategies for you to be able to apply to increase your levels of emotional intelligence. Shane, thanks for joining us this evening. So, my score there was 78 out of 100. Now, the following year, after I had taken my strategies and worked really hard on my emotional intelligence, I sat my emotional quotient assessment once again. So, I sat down, I went through the emotional quotient assessment, and what I realized that through all the hard work that I'd applied that year, my emotional quotient score went up, and I got it all the way up to 100 out of 100, which meant my emotional awareness was really, really high. What I started to feel at that stage, I started to feel that I really knew who I was. So at that stage, I was 38, 2 years out from being 40, but I found my groove and I found my place and I found the track that I should have been going down. And that gave me a lot of confidence. And it gave me the confidence to step up again because finally I knew who I was. Now, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that about 84% of the adult population, they have a feeling of unfulfilled potential. And when my score was down around 78, I was feeling that I had a lot of unfulfilled potential. I felt that I could be so much and I felt that I should be so much further down the track, but something was holding me back. So at this stage, when my score was 78, I kind of knew who I was. I kind of knew my emotional strengths. I kind of knew my emotional weaknesses. I didn't really know my strengths and limits. And I don't believe my self worth and self esteem was high enough. But as I started to grow my emotional intelligence, I started to have better self awareness. And we can see that here. Over a course of a year, taken my score from 78 all the way up to 100. What happened in 2018? My sales were higher in 2018. That was one of the first things that I saw. My sales increased. After my sales increased, my income had also increased. My referrals and client results also got better. And I put it down to knowing myself better, knowing my strengths, and knowing who I really was. So that was in 2018. Now, during 2018, I sought to increase my levels of self-awareness once again. And I worked on myself and I worked on myself and I worked on myself. And then in 2019, I took the emotional quotient assessment again. And this time, my score came in at 96 out of 100. Now, what I felt, although my score dropped by 4 points, I felt I was actually more in tune with myself this time around. So previously the score was 100, but now it scaled down to about 96. And what I did feel when my score was at about 100, I did feel that I was over evaluating myself. I thought I was a little bit better than I truly was. So in 2019, the score balanced out and came down to 96 out of 100. And in 2019, I had one of my best years in business. Although that score dropped by about 4 points, I felt it was a lot more realistic based on everything that I knew. What else excited me about that was that the population average, the average person in Australia, their emotional quotient score in the area of self-awareness in 2019 had gone up by 2 points. And so it was at 76. However, my score was 20 points higher than the others. Now, as I mentioned before, Dr. Travis Bradbury and his work in emotional intelligence, he said that the average person with higher levels of emotional intelligence would earn about $29,000 per year more than people with low levels of emotional intelligence. And I've just put the statistic back up on the screen here for you. Now, what I realized in 2019, my income, my sales were probably about 10 times the average coach. So I knew based on my levels of emotional intelligence, I was making far more money, far more sales, having much better results than the average coach. And I can put it down to my levels of emotional intelligence. So I constantly track my levels of emotional intelligence. I track it from year to year, like going to the doctor and having a blood test, like going to the doctor and having an x-ray or an ultrasound. You should always check in on your emotional health. And what happens is you just produce far better results. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. There's so much more to cover tonight, and I'm going to give you some more strategies right now. So, what I'd like to know from you, if you can just go down into the chat box, let me know, what do you know about emotional intelligence? What have you learned so far? And maybe what are some of the strategies that you're using to improve your performance right now? I'd love to hear what you're doing to increase your levels of emotional intelligence. So, as you're doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when people's self-awareness is less active. And I like the word less active because there's a lot of people out there in society right now and their emotional intelligence is less active than others. These people, when you work with them, they're the type of people who you can't always rely on. They're not a strong player on the team. And remember, the chain always breaks at the weakest link. So if you're a business owner and you've got people whose level of self-awareness is less active, these are some of the things that you're going to start to see. Now, the first one here is that people who have self-awareness that is less active, they tend to struggle to articulate what they like and what they don't like. So you could be interviewing somebody in your business and they might have been in your business for a couple of years and you could ask them, well, what is it that you most like about your career? And you'll look at them and they'll look at you and they'll say, well, I'm really not sure. You could be interviewing somebody to work with your company and you'll ask them, what do you do best? What do you like the most about what you do? And they'll just look at you blankly. See, a lot of people don't have that level of self-awareness, so they tend to struggle. Now, the next thing is that they tend to have a limited emotional vocabulary. Now, as a coach who specializes in emotional intelligence, I will often ask my prospects and my clients, I'll say, what emotion are you feeling now? And they'll say, I'm feeling good. And I'll ask them again, I'll say, what emotion are you feeling now? And they'll say, I'm feeling good. Now, the interesting thing, good is not an emotion. What I tend to hear when I first start working with people, they'll say, I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad. Interesting thing, good and bad are not emotions. They're just concepts. So what happens is if you can't name it, you can't tame it. If you can't name it, you can't tame it. If you can't name the emotion that you're working with at any given time, or the one that you're feeling at any given time, you actually can't regulate that emotion. Now, here's an example that will blow your mind. There was a client that I was called out to work with, and he came to me and he said, Daniel, I'm feeling anxiety. And I said, what are you feeling anxiety about? He said, I'm feeling anxiety because I'm going to cheat on my wife. I said, you're feeling anxious because you're going to cheat on your wife? And I said, absolutely. I said, that's not anxiety. I said, that's guilt. Now, because he didn't know the difference between anxiety and guilt, he actually couldn't regulate his emotions effectively. So we have to be able to identify the difference between the emotions, and people who are less active in the area of self-awareness will find it harder to articulate their emotions. Now, if this is making sense to you, give me a little thumbs up in the chat box. If you're joining me live tonight, press live. If you're joining me on the replay, press replay and let me know you're joining me here on the replay. Now, the next part. We find that people with less active self-awareness, they tend to overlook or ignore emotional data when making decisions. What we know is that decisions are made in the right brain. Your right brain is your emotional brain. And what happens is people can get so excited, they can get, as a buyer, they can get so caught up in the buying process that they're not connected with the emotional data that's coming through to make the decision. See, what a lot of salespeople are trained to do, they're trained to transfer enthusiasm. I want you to remember that one. Sales is a transfer of enthusiasm. So a salesperson wants to transfer their enthusiasm about a product or a service over to you. And if they can get you emotional, then you'll become less rational and you'll buy because of an emotional impulse. If you've learned sales, you know this, you're trained to do that. So what you've got to be able to do for the people who are less active, they will overlook that emotional data. They may have doubts, they may have skepticisms, they may have a gut instinct that this is not the right thing to do. But what will happen is they'll overlook that and they'll block that out. Are you finding this fascinating? I love this topic and I think everybody needs to learn it. Shianti, thank you for joining me live. It's great to see you here once again. What else? What happens here? People who are less active in the area of self awareness, they may over or underestimate their personal strengths and limits. These are the people who promise you the world. They overpromise and they under deliver. That's how you recognize these people. They're also unaware of how their emotions may manifest in their action. What happens is these people become very emotional. Let's say they get very angry. They get angry and they'll tell you they're not an angry person. And when it comes to taking action, they'll be unaware that they're acting from a place of anger. People who experience a lot of jealousy, what will happen is they'll experience the jealousy. They won't be aware of it, but they'll act from that jealous standpoint. And it really gets in their way of being a high performer. Tim Hawke, great to see you there live. Thanks for joining us. So we've got one side of less active. The other side of the equation is more active. And you might recognize some of these in yourself. And give me a thumbs up, or just once you see some of these more active statements here, if you see some of these that are more active in you, I want you to type that in the box below. So people who are more active in self-awareness, the first thing is that they're clear on their personal preferences and their priorities. They know what they want. They know their goals. They know where they're going. They know the difference between what they've got to do today, what's urgent and important. And these people are very clear on their preferences. They're very decisive. You'll go shopping with them and they'll tell you exactly what they want, and they'll also tell you what they don't want. These people are very good, in my opinion, in time management because they know their priorities. They know what they should be doing first. They know what they should be doing second, and they know what they shouldn't be doing at all. And so this comes back to self-awareness. Next, they have a rich emotional vocabulary and they can categorize their emotions. Now, I'm not sure if you know this, but it's something that I've learned over the years is there's 12 different forms of anger. See, a lot of people just think there's anger and frustration, but there's actually 12 different types of anger. There's about 12 different types of sadness. There's 5 major fears. Imagine that. There's 5 kinds of guilt. And so these people have a very rich emotional vocabulary. And remember, if you can name it, you can tame it. So if you have a higher level of self-awareness, it's also a lot easier for you to regulate your emotions, because if you can name it, you can tame it. The third one here is that they listen to their intuition and they interpret its meaning. Your head brain has about 50,000 neurological networks. Your heart brain has about 50 million neurological networks. Your gut brain, or your enteric brain, has about 500 billion neural networks. In terms of forms of intelligence, your gut brain, your enteric brain, is one of your biggest sources of intelligence in your body. And you'll find that very successful business people have very active levels of self-awareness. And you can tell it because they're always tuned in to their intuition and they're able to interpret the meaning of the gut instinct. So what about you? How's your gut instinct? Is your gut instinct your strength? If your gut instinct is your strength, type in gut instinct in the chat box below. The next one, they know how much to take on and what to turn down. Remember, I mentioned before, back in 2017 and 2018, my level of emotional intelligence was all the way down to 78. And one of the things here was I was taking on too much too soon. My goals were too big too soon. I was trying to stretch too far too soon. And so my emotional intelligence at that stage was less active. But now it's more active, and I know how much to take on. I know when to say yes. I know when to say no. And I know when to turn down business because my self-awareness is much more active. What about for you? Maybe it's the same for you. Now, Shianti, gut instinct. Excellent. So, Shianti, we know that you're more active in self-awareness because you're tuned in to the gut instinct and you're able to articulate what it means. Well done. Now, people with more active self-awareness, they can recognize their emotional state and how it may affect their interactions. That's a great strength to have. They also notice subtle changes in their body and the emotional state. One of the things with the body, the language of the mind is words. The language of the body is feelings. So let's repeat that one. The language of the mind is words. The language of the body is feelings. And people who are more active in self awareness, they're very in tuned with their body. I went to the doctor the other day and I was able to accurately describe the changes in my body. So, what that meant for the doctor, it was a very simple diagnosis for the doctor at that stage. Tim Hawke, gut instinct. Well done. Now, the next one here is self-awareness. So let's just have a quick look here. We had a look at self-awareness. We had a look at what was more active and what was less active. Now, let's take a quick look in at the next stage. And the next stage, the things that we want to have a look at here is we just want to have a quick refresh on what self-awareness is. So remember, self-awareness includes emotional awareness. This is being able to recognize your emotions and their effects. Really important. So as you think about your goals, as you think about your aspirations, you've also got to take into consideration if you want to increase your income, what should you be improving in your levels of emotional intelligence, specifically in the area of self-awareness? If you're focused on emotional awareness, how could that lead to greater sales or a higher income? So self-awareness includes emotional awareness, which is recognizing your emotions and their effects. That was what I was working on in 2017. In 2018, I was working on an accurate self-assessment. This was knowing my strengths and limits. As I mentioned before, my goals were too big, too soon. I was trying to stretch too far, too soon. But once I had a higher level of emotional intelligence and a higher score in self-awareness, I knew my strengths and I knew my limits. It meant that I was able to achieve my goals faster with a lot less stress. The third part of self-awareness is your self-confidence. Remember, you can never have enough confidence. Nobody will ever come to you and say, hey, I've got too much confidence. So many people will come to you and say, I just don't have enough confidence. And so once you hear those key words, you'll realize that they're less active in the area of self-awareness. So self-confidence. Self-confidence is a strong sense of your self-worth and capabilities. So how cool is that? Emotional intelligence, ladies and gentlemen, I love it. And I'm glad that you're here learning this today, because as you learn to improve your levels of emotional intelligence, what happens is your income also increases. So let's just have a quick review here. We had a look at my emotional quotient assessment today, and I've been tracking this very closely. I have my one here for 2020 as well. I just didn't get the opportunity to share it tonight, but I'll share it next time. Is what we have is we have an emotional quotient assessment. And today, just like going to the doctor to have an x-ray, you can take an x-ray and have a look at your levels of emotional intelligence. Once you have a look at your levels of emotional intelligence, then you can start to put some really good strategic plans into place to improve your performance. And just have a look at what's possible here. The reason why I say what's possible is because your IQ is often fixed. If you had an IQ test at around about 13 or 14 and you went and got your IQ tested again today, it would be about the same. But there is no direct connection between your IQ and your level of success. Where with emotional intelligence, there is a direct connection between your level of emotional intelligence and how well you perform. You know, the latest research does show that emotional intelligence is responsible for at least 58% of your performance. So it's really worth your while improving your levels of emotional intelligence. So let's have a quick review here. I started in 2017 with a score of 78. It was right there against the population average. It was only 4 points higher than the average. So in this area, I didn't have an advantage and I didn't have a strength over anybody else. Over that 12 months, I focused really specifically on improving my levels of emotional awareness. So I got really good at recognizing my emotions and how they impacted me. Remember before I said I was drunk with optimism, believing everything was possible. And it is possible, by the way, but there's always things that have to happen before you get somewhere. And what was happening was I was looking too far out into the future, going too far, too soon, with too much optimism, thinking that I could achieve anything before I achieved the most important thing, which was the first step. So that was 78 out of 100. The following year, I retested. It went all the way up to 100. So it was now 26 points higher than the average person in Australia. And then all the way into 2019, my score balanced out a little bit. And in 2019, my emotional quotient assessment, the score in self-awareness, leveled out at 96 out of 100. And I felt that was a lot more accurate than the previous year. I felt that the year before I was still a little bit optimistic, still a little bit drunk with enthusiasm, but it balanced out in 2019 at 96. And as I mentioned before, in 2019, it was one of my best business years. And I put that down to really knowing my emotional strengths, having a really accurate self-assessment. And coming into my 39th year at that stage and into my 40th now, I just felt I really knew myself. I knew my worth and what I could bring to a business, and my confidence was through the roof. And so these are the things that happen once you discover your levels of emotional intelligence. So you've seen here, this is my emotional quotient assessment, and you can also measure yours. So if you're curious about your levels of emotional intelligence, if you would like to know your score in self-awareness, if you would like to know what your score is in self-regulation, if you'd like to know your motivation score, then I'd like you to send me a private message here on social media and let me know that you'd like me to measure your emotional quotient assessment for you. You'd like to tell me that you'd like to know your level of emotional intelligence, and I'll show you how to measure it. It's a really great system. So you can measure it in 5 key areas of emotional intelligence, and that gives you the blueprint of what you need to do in the year ahead to level up and become a high performer. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I trust that you've enjoyed this content. And remember, one idea is enough to make you rich. Just take one idea away from this live stream today, apply it until you get the result in your business, and automatically your results will go through the roof. Wherever you are today, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on our live stream tomorrow at 3 p.m. Taiwan time, 5 p.m. Sydney time, where I'll be interviewing a good friend of mine, Robert Bruss, and he's going to show you how to launch your podcast. He's going to show you how to get a lot of eyes on your product really fast. So, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are today, have a wonderful day. Ciao for now.